Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 10th episode of XYZ Live and streaming at you from the glorious homes of three XYZ people today via the Google Hangouts central location, wherever that is, somewhere in Silicon Valley, i.e. San Francisco, i.e. hell. So today, obviously, we have David Hiscox, the regular editor or the regular anchor of this show and esteemed editor of XYZ, along with XYZ's theology expert, Rod Lampard. So thanks, guys. Welcome to the panel. We'll call it the panel for today. The panel of three of us. No worries. Well, I'm not really having you anymore, Dave. I think you're pretty much locked in as a co-host for now, unless you decide to hand the reins off to someone else. So just before we get into the main topics of hand, I mean, anything we want to add to in terms of the footy results? I mean, I just got home from watching the Hawks barely beat the Geelong Cats. It was a hard one to watch. Nearly it was a hard one to watch.
Matty, as you know, I detest Hawthorn to the bottom of my heart. They've caused an early psychological scar in 1988 to the tune of 96 points. But even I called out for holding the ball against Geelong in that last quarter. The umpiring was shocking.
Oh yeah, that was in our forward half, wasn't it? And it was basically he was tackled, he had prior opportunity, and then the umpire's just like, "Oh, you got a handball to it." He basically fell over.
I saw a guy get slows, and they didn't pay it.
Yeah, the one that got me was when James Sicily marked it on 50 metres on the defensive 50. It was a kick out from defence, like kick out from behind, and he's marked it. And then, like, as he's sort of walking off, he's dropped the ball, and they called play on, and Geelong got a goal out of it. I think they got them back within 6 points. I'm just like, that's ridiculous. You can see it on the replay. He's clearly controlling the ball, and they said play on. It was Razor Ray, I reckon. Razor Ray loves Patrick Dangerfield. Whenever he umpires again for the Geelong games, he just gives Dangerfield as much leeway as he possibly can. That's my theory.
He did get away with murder a little bit. He gets
away with it
as someone who doesn't care. Like, it was great to watch. It was a great match to watch.
Oh, it was great to win in the end. It was Hawthorn Geelong. Well, you're going to come to the Hawthorn Melbourne game, aren't you? And we'll have to sit there with the camera on and.
I reckon we're going to flog you, to be honest, Matty.
You reckon?
We really should have beaten Geelong. Yeah, we should have beaten Geelong.
I don't think you're going to flog us.
And you only just got over Geelong.
Yeah, but here's the thing. The only reason we only just got over Geelong is because, firstly, we couldn't really kick very straight. We should have kicked straighter and had more chances. And B, the second reason is our backline was horrendous. We were missing Frawley, and I think he'd be the only key back that we have. James Sicily had a decent game last week, but he was not that good today. And none of our back line had standout performances. And I don't think Melbourne's forward line is going to be. I don't think it's as potent as Geelong's. So
Jesse
maybe
Hogan will kick 10. Jesse
Hogan. Is that your prediction? Is that your prediction?
Yeah, he'll kick 10.
That Jesse Hogan. Are you going to put some 50 bucker on that? I reckon they'll be lucky to get 10 kicks against the Hawks, actually. Maybe 10 handballs he'll get. Whatever. Melbourne won pretty comfortably in the end, didn't you? Like, I'm pretty sure I was watching.
Yeah, it was an easy match, yeah.
Who were you playing against?
Brisbane. Yeah.
Brisbane, yeah, that's right. You're playing against Brisbane. And Gold Coast had a big win against Carlton. I was watching that game. Tommy Lynch. He's is it Tom Lynch? Yeah, Tom Lynch. I think that's his name.
He was spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah, he's good. It was a good one. He's good. There's actually a few good games. The game today, as a Hawthorn supporter, it was great to get the win, but we were 4 goals up, so we shouldn't be winning by a point when you're 4 goals up in the last quarter, with 10 minutes to go as well.
Yeah. I'm looking at both Greater Western Sydney and the Gold Coast Suns, like the two new teams. All of a sudden, they're going well. Gary Ablett gets out of the way, and all of a sudden, the other players in the Gold Coast Suns step up. So.
Well, they can actually play a zone, and they can actually play defensive pressure without. Gary Ablett actually played really well today, so I think the move for him to going back to the Geelong's pretty good. He is still quick. I reckon he'll keep playing for a while too. If today's anything to go by, he's got that step. Just runs at you, and then it's just like, oh, by the way, I'm running past you. just that.
He's
step,
just he's just got the nous. Yeah,
he's really good. I reckon
he's the son of God after all.
the son of God.
It's a big call.
Yeah, well, it's perfect segue into the next section, which is the Easter special, as the name of the live stream suggests. So, plenty of footy talk can happen later on if you actually really desperately want to know as a viewer. Our opinion on the big week in football, but Fox Sports, if you have that, or there's plenty of Herald Sun articles that you can read and all that kind of thing for real analysis. Today, we're going to talk about Easter and what it means in terms of like the religious holiday and all that kind of thing. And I mean, we got our theology expert, so we'll ask him what he's learned from his studies about God, and I have a few questions for him as well. But Dave, do you want to take it away? Take away with Rod.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Rod, if I can just put you on the spot for a little bit, would you just be able to tell us a little bit about your background? Because I've been very, very keen to sort of encourage sort of talking about Christianity on the XYZ, because I see it as one of the foundations of Western civilization. So I've been keen to get you and a number of people on just to sort of really flog it. Would you be able to just tell us about sort of a little bit about what you do, what your history, and about your blog?
All right, well, I guess I come from a broken home, very dysfunctional background, and I hated Christians, hated the church, went to a Christian school, went to Catholic school. I just never really fitted into that Christian scene and that Christian culture. And it was something that I rebelled against. I thought there were a lot of hypocrites, double standards, a lot of people looking to people with wealth to promote within the church rather than really get behind people who are broken. In other words, people with a lot of baggage weren't often welcome. Too complicated. Beyond that, I actually ended up found myself in a gutter. 96, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, that period, and I just had to make a decision about where my life was going. And God sort of stood there in a way. A friend had mentioned to me that church was much more than what I'd experienced, and that it was about relationship with Jesus Christ, and not the fancy ritual or the fanfare, the bells and whistles, if you like. And beyond that, I entered retail, and then I ended up doing a degree in ministry and theology, which is where I am now, I guess. I currently homeschool our kids. My wife and I have 5 kids, and we homeschool. And I've been doing that for a few years, and doing independent study between doing that as well, and working towards doing a master's degree in hopefully theology and ministry. If not, it'll be something else. But yeah.
And sorry to stop you there. How's raising 5 kids and homeschooling them like? So, I mean, full respect for taking them out of the public school system. I mean, I wish I could do that as well. But how, in terms of what sort of routine do you have to go through? And so the one thing I'd be worried about with homeschooling kids is whether or not they get socialized and they can deal, they learn to deal with other kids appropriately on a regular basis. So like, how do you work socialization into it? I mean, I suppose that they have 4 siblings. Each of them have 4 siblings, which would help.
It's a great question, and I think it's a big concern for a lot of people. Socialization seems to be the big concern, but and the big question we get. I think though it's not really a question that I think is relevant, because as far as socialization goes, they're around people of different ages, and they learn to cooperate with each other. There are also homeschool co-op groups that you can meet with and do things with outside the house and things. I would actually say our kids are probably better socialized than some in the actual school system. That's not to say the school system is rotten or wrong. I think there's a place for it. If you can homeschool, then do it where you can, when you can, if you can. Yeah, as far as the routine goes, we in New South Wales, we have to register with the Board of Studies, and that's fair enough. There's accountability in that, and we work with the Australian curriculum, which is important, I think. So we're all, there's a sort of an element of transparency that goes with that, and we meet with the Board of Studies rep and discuss learning outcomes and different things that we have in mind. I think socialization itself, we talk about socialization, but what about bullying in the schools? I mean, how does playground politics that is established by, kids in the same bracket that sort of put in this conveyor belt industry, and they're almost taught to be copies of one another. And if you don't fit that bracket, then you're on the outside. And I mean, in real life, you're not really going to be with people your own age right throughout. From year 12 onwards, you're with people from all different ages, all different ethnicities, depending on what location you are in Australia, I guess. But as far as socialization goes, I think that there's a broader question in what role does socialization play in dysfunctional kids, in the breakdown of teens within the school system. Bullying, for example, social bullying, bullying online. Social media seems to just, I guess, compact that. And it just causes, I think, a breakdown in these people's lives, especially if you're on the outside of that. Like if you don't have the phone, you don't have the Instagram account, you don't have the Nike shoes. I mean, it used to be when we were at school, like without iPhones and that, it was like the backpacks or the right kind of shoes, the right kind of clothes, or did you go with everybody to this party or that party? I mean, that probably still happens, but I think social media as a whole, not that all of it's bad, but I think it magnifies dysfunctional socialization that takes place within the playground. And you're getting kids who are setting society's rules. It's almost like William Golding's Lord of the Flies. I mean, and teachers can only do so much. They are not parents. They have a role in educating those children. But our system in Australia, our welfare system, is almost like making the government the parent, or the teacher by default the parent. Now, that's a lot of responsibility for teachers in the education system. They're not paid to be parents.
Okay, sorry, mate. So I was just wondering, I mean, because I sort of heard a little bit about the benefits of unstructured play, which is I'd be a little bit concerned about if I was going to keep my kids in homeschool. I mean, if it wasn't, it'd be much better for me. I'd be a lot more happy to do it if there was, say, like 3 or 4 other families all homeschooling, and you could say, all right, finish homeschooling, and then you guys go off and play, and they're all of different ages, so they're mixing with people, lots of other kids in an unstructured environment, and they're learning negotiation skills and all that kind of thing. I mean, I get what you're saying when it comes to being in a playground and bullying, and it can be a little bit Lord of the Fliesy, and I understand that, but I would have thought that that's sort of good for development for a lot of kids, in terms of learning how to deal with different people's, different people and conflict and that sort of socialize that, like that the dominant hierarchy in a school. It's important to get them used to the idea that is this case. So I suppose they get that at home as well. My point is, as I mentioned, is how do you think you're going to get that unstructured play? Like how are they going to go out and learn to negotiate amongst themselves as kids with their peers, away from an authority structure?
And I guess that's a question of, do I abdicate my responsibility as a parent by letting my child be parented by their peers? That's how I would view that question. I know that's probably not what you're saying, but that's how I hear what you're saying, is that the peers are important in the role of raising a child. And I just
that's sort of not what I'm saying. No. So not that they're not raising it and instilling values and all that kind of thing.
I think
it's more about so if you're in the playground and you got 10 kids and you might have a grade 1 kid through to like grade 5 kid at the oldest. And there's some different sizes and all that kind of thing, and they've got a football and they need to set up a game to play without parent supervision. So there's a lot of negotiation, there's a lot of back and forth there. People have to be okay with the rules, they have to be okay with the teams and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like when a kid has a parent, you just say, oh, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there, you go there. It's like, oh, okay, they're all organized. But how is a homeschool kid going to get that that ability to negotiate on their own and set their own terms within a play environment, which is, I don't know, I see the value of homeschooling in that, you're keeping your kids, it's a more, you have more control over their upbringing, which is a good thing. And you're not putting the parenting on the teachers, but I'd be worried that the children would be missing that element of learning those negotiation skills and learning how to deal with their peers and learning how, because I mean, you're going to be negotiating all through life with people who are your equal, people who are in authority, and you're going to have to learn those negotiation skills if you're going to actually be able to get through life without a severe amount of social issues. So I was wondering how they learn that negotiation to be able to build their own. That's what when I say socialization, that's what I'm sort of meaning, like learning how to deal with conflict without an authority figure being in the area and build a game and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I think that there's an element of independence that homeschoolers get, and there's a level of maturity that they attain through having to work by themselves and with even their siblings. As I said, there are home ed groups, so home op groups. They get together from time to time. Homeschoolers tend to go do group activities with other homeschoolers. So as far as that goes, I think that socialization in that sense is catered for. I haven't witnessed a negative effect of socialization on any of the kids that I've seen who have been homeschooled. Our kids, I would say, are fairly responsible and independent. They would start games with others rather than sit back and be feel insecure or timid, perhaps. They have a confidence, a level of confidence that I don't see and haven't seen, and certainly didn't see at school. And I did not have that at school. I was quite timid and laid back, and probably one of the quieter ones that, out of fear, really, and anxiety of not being accepted, and that came through bullying and other things as well. But as I said, I think there's value in the educational system that we have in Australia. I just think that it's become an industrial complex that is just either there's unfair expectations put on teachers to be parents or surrogate parents, and in some aspects of it, I just don't think that's right. I think that's an abdication of responsibility. And growing up the way I did, I was my parents abdicated responsibility for me, and I was left to the streets pretty much. I mean, I had a home to go to, but I would end up staying in my mate's house, and we would just live basically how we wanted. There was no accountability. There was no parental structure. And I went to school, and I had that. I think some I skipped school, just how it was. So even at school, I struggled, and I think a lot of kids on the outside struggle with this the idea of having to try and fit in but stand out. So how do you do that in the school system? How do you fit in but stand out when the system says you've got to be equal? And now they've got, you've heard about these participation awards and things like that just to make people feel good. So I think I know how the balance works. I don't know how it all sort of comes down.
I think a lot of the issues with the modern schooling system is the fact that it's run completely by the state. And like you said, I mean, how do you stand out when, on one hand, you're being given participation trophies for turning up, and on the other hand, it's like, well, you still got to work hard and excel and all that kind of thing. So I think, I don't know, I'm of the opinion that schooling is, if you're going to send your children to school, the primary role of teachers is to teach them how to read, teach them how to write, and teach them how to do basic mathematics, and basically, and then teach them how to, they can then teach themselves. Throw some things in, like, you know, you can throw the PE and all that kind of stuff in, PE, history, geography, or whatever, just to mix it up. But reading, writing, and arithmetic, these are the only 3 things that they need. And a lot of the issues that you get because the schooling is state funded, so there's really not much accountability for individual teachers, and you know, a lot of them will still get paid whether they do a good job or not. And then you get a lot of this creeping indoctrination, like, you know, the creeping indoctrination. You know, everyone gets a trophy. You know, the attempted takeover of safe schools, which was just horrendous. So I think that's a lot of the issue. I mean, the way that I would fix that is with a voucher system, at least. I mean, you know, we basically got to get the schooling out of the hands of the government, and even encourage people to homeschool as well, a lot of the cases. Because the thing is, it's like the issues that I was bringing up, I would think that they would be largely negated if lots of kids were homeschooled, maybe, because that way you get, you know, if you knew that there were 10 homeschool families in the area, you could then work with those 10 families to, you know, say, all right, let's go to the park for the day, or let's go do PE, and we can get these other families in, and you can organise it. You can actually have a community there. I mean, honestly, I haven't really actually put a huge amount of thought into the homeschooling thing. It's interesting to talk about.
What might happen is, imagine if you had 10 people in the same street all homeschooling their children, and then after a couple of years they realise that, you know, how about we just set up our own school independent of the socialist education department and just do it ourselves, and sort of basically lead to a decentralization of education. I think that which is quite well.
Something that they wouldn't like, but I mean, this is why it's so, like, when the states say, "Oh, we have to invest in education. We have to invest in education." Yeah. So maybe we should have to invest. Maybe we should just make it a voucher system. Everyone gets the exact same amount, and then if you want to homeschool your kids, I'll take that money. Thank you very much, as long as you can prove that you're actually teaching your kids.
I don't think. I mean, we don't get any extra funding from it.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I'm just saying.
The average. I think we worked it out based on the Australian Homeschool Association's website. They were talking about how much money homeschoolers save the government. I mean, I think for us it was like $80,000 a year if we would put them into public education. So, you know, we can say all we like, that it's, you know, that it's a good alternative or a bad alternative. But I think that from my experience, and we've been doing it for 7 years, and I've talked to many homeschoolers in the same bracket. You know, some succeed and some move on they go back to the school system. But I think as an alternative, I think it's viable. I think it's an option. And if you can do it, I recommend it.
No worries. All right. So, I mean, we talked about homeschool a lot longer than I even thought when we talked about it.
I think that was an excellent tangent.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, let's move on to something maybe a little bit more theology based, and maybe have a little bit of a discussion about that. Because I mean, I have my own ideas when it comes to God and the meaning of life and all that kind of thing. I'd just be interested to see what your thoughts were. Like, what does Easter kind of mean to you as a theologian, and what have you learnt in your studies about the holiday?
Well, first of all, Easter is about reconciliation. You know, it's about God setting humanity free. I mean, it's the Exodus. It's an embrace of Exodus. It's this liberation of humanity, not just from sin, but from itself, from everything that seeks to annihilate it. You could call that devil. You could call that sins of the flesh. Whatever you like to, but it's all in there. It's all packed in there. And Jesus Christ dying on the cross for our sins is God reaching out to humanity. This is what we would call the self-revelation of God. God humiliating himself in order to exalt humanity, his creature. The Creator reaches for his creature, provides a way out. And this is an embrace of grace and gracious decision, as Karl Barth would call it, the anti-Nazi theologian. A decisive decision for our freedom by the God who is free. You know, we can't conjure up God. This isn't about something that we make up. This isn't something conjured up by our ancestors. This is a response to an event, a significant event in history and time and space. And I think Easter is at once a fearful thing and a sorrowful thing, but also something full of joy and expectation. Because Easter, we move beyond that to what we call Pentecost, and the revealing of a promise. This is God's self-revealing of himself. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. This is a healing.
I like it. I mean, yeah, that's an interesting take on it too. Well, I see Easter as when I look at the holiday and the symbolism around it, and when it's actually, because it was, what is it? It's like basically coming into autumn for the northern. Is it autumn? No, it's spring, isn't it? It's spring in the northern hemisphere. It's a springtime holiday. So it's interesting for me. It's like the way the symbolism around Jesus Christ, how he dies on the cross and then he's reborn 3 days later. It's like, it's a symbolism, and it's, the holiday is based in spring, which is a time when in the northern hemisphere when it's coming out of the winter and then coming back into summer, into life and breeding and planting and crops and all that kind of thing. So it's really a holiday of celebrating death and renewal and the general cycle of life, which it comes in. I mean, I guess that would be a lot of the reason why the holiday is in that time, and it's great the way that it's used the symbolism of Christianity to highlight that. The most fascinating thing I find about Christianity is how the Europeans have taken the Christian symbolism and molded it to the old pagan holidays and like the old farming based solar calendar, lunar calendar. I think isn't Easter's a lunar holiday. So I find it really interesting how Christians have managed to say, all right, you know what? The ideas of Christianity are really, really good, but we're not going to throw away our old beliefs, because they actually, if you look at it, they actually serve the people pretty well in terms of when they take the holiday. Christmas is it's a feast before in the winter, and then you got spring and Easter where you've got the life and the rebirth, and this is when the animals are breeding. So it's an interesting holiday for me. I think it's a lot. It's not as meaningful as it should be in the public sphere. Well, rather than say meaningful, it's not. I think there needs to be more talked about it. Like it needs to. I know everyone's sort of on holiday over Easter, but I haven't really seen much Easter stuff other than like Easter eggs, which is kind of disappointing, really. Because I mean, you get lots of Christian stuff, like lots of Christian pageantry and all that kind of thing when it comes to the Christmas, which is really, really good. But I haven't really noticed it much for Easter. I'm just interested to see what your thoughts on that were. I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen a lot more the Christianity, like the Christian service and all that kind of thing around Easter.
Yeah, I think the egg symbolizes like new life, right? This is, as you said, rebirth. But I'd have to say that we wouldn't see it as rebirth. I mean, we see it as resurrection, and not just as the promise of the resurrection for ourselves. We were reunited with the body eventually once Christ returns, and this goes beyond Easter. This goes beyond ourselves. As I said, it's a response to an event where the God who is free sets humanity free. And as far as the linking with pagan festivals goes, I've never really bought into that line. I always see it as closer to the Jewish festivals. For example, with Passover, as I said, Easter is an embrace of Exodus, and Passover remembers that Exodus event. That's you might see. I think Apple put up the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston for 99 cents to rent. And that's sort of in that you'll see this Christian theme even played out long before Jesus Christ was killed and rose from the dead. So I think that there's a solemnity in that, but there's also a reverence and there's almost I think a gravity to it that once we look into it, once we really see it, not with our skeptical modern postmodern kind of eyes, but with in respect to what they saw it. The witnesses saw it, and we really listened to what they had to say and let them speak for themselves without putting our own, I guess, arrogance into it and saying that I am better than them because I'm smarter or I live in a more scientific world. I think it's unfair to them to say that, I'm a better person because I am enlightened, for example, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I think as far as the Hebrews go and history is concerned, we tend to fall back into this, I guess, modern arrogance. Look at the pyramids, for example, look at the Egyptian history and things like that. And I think sometimes we just get too complacent with our own knowledge and puffed up with pride, perhaps, And I think Easter is a great time of reflection in that sense, that we're brought to a place of humility and unity, this place where all have fallen short of the glory of God. And that includes rich, poor. It includes cool and uncool, popular and not so popular. They're all equal in that sense. And that is not an equality that's brought in by a Marxist revolution. That is brought in by, the God who is free, the God who sets us free. It's a revolution. Easter is a revolution, and it is God's revolution. It's not one brought about by humanity or forced and imposed on people. It's something that He lets happen to Himself in order for us to, through His Son, in order for us to be with Him. As I said and have said in my writings, that God with us life with God begins with life with us, God with us. And that starts and ends with Jesus Christ, the Word of God. It says that John says in the beginning, the Word was with God and the Word was God. And the light, darkness cannot overcome the light. And that's obviously, some imagery and stuff that John uses, and John uses quite a bit in the gospel. But, I like to look at that and take it seriously and take it to heart and think, there is a liberation that takes place, not one that is forced on me by a government or by a parent or by peers or society, whether that be political correctness or whatever. This is a real transformation that comes through the Holy Spirit. It's transformation of the heart. That it's something I've read that is confronting me and telling me that I am a sinner saved by grace, and that I'm a sinner in the sense that I cannot save myself. And Easter is a point of contact with us that says, I guess, that God loves us. And it's hard to see that when you see Jesus on the cross, or the images that we see anyway.
Steve, okay, sorry,
he's a Jewish
chime in there.
He's a Jewish Messiah, and we, I think, in the West can sometimes overlook that.
It's okay. So, you touched on some pretty good points again. And from what I'm hearing, it's the point of view you're coming from is definitely a very, I was going to say a very Christian point of view. And you've obviously read the Gospels and understand them pretty well. See, for me, it's like I take a slightly less literal approach to when I do read the Bibles. I believe that obviously I believe Jesus was an individual who taught people a way to live their life, and that he got crucified for his beliefs. And the Bible came in and sort of, people wrote their accounts of what happened, and then there were other people wrote the Gospels and all that kind of stuff, and they put in this story, and they sort of wrote this story about it using symbolism from stories, like from other Jewish stories, or from older stories, and they put it together into this story that it was Jesus. And I think ultimately what the story of Easter tells us is that really the message that Jesus Christ was trying to send to the people, in that this is how you should live your life, in that you should never back down. If you are saying something that someone that you believe in, you shouldn't ever back down. And that's the story. That's really the lesson that I get from it, in that it's like he's dying for our sins, in that Jesus is showing you the way of how to live how to live as a moral individual, as a moral human being. And if you live your life as a moral human being, then you'll be reborn with God anyway, and you'll be. Hopefully that makes sense to yourself. But yeah, this is how I see it. Like I don't take so much of a literal interpretation of where the Bible's coming from. I look at it as more a collection of stories, where in the New Testament it's more likely to be based around actual events, but taking some other stories from different areas and building this meta hero that is Jesus Christ. So I mean, for me, it's like it's funny because people ask me, like, do you want to take Jesus Christ into your heart? And like, for me, when you talk about the skeptical mind, like for me, it's like, okay, what do you mean by Jesus Christ? Like, what do you mean by take him into your heart? It's like, there's a number of ways that you could define what you mean by that, and I define it as living a meaningful and truthful life, and that's what it means to me. But I mean, other people ultimately worship all the actions and everything. Like, they worship the actual figure of Jesus, and I'm not quite. I can't do that. I don't know, for some reason I just can't do that. Just be interested to hear your take on that interpretation of the Easter story, as opposed to the literal. All right, because I mean, I was brought up Christian as well, so I understand. Like, there's all this. There's the Christian. There's the Christian. The way they explain it. But in terms, I try and explain it to myself in a more secular way. And I know that I don't want to try and make that sound, like I said, hopefully it doesn't sound like, oh, I'm arrogant, we're smarter than these people and all that kind of thing. But in a way, we do know more now about the world than we did back then. So I think it's important to bridge that gap between what they were seeing back then and how they understood the messages and how they wrote those messages down, and then maybe reinterpreting based on what we do know to be true now, based on what science has told us. So, and the fact that the stories, often these kind of stories have subliminal meanings. Like, a lot of the stories in the Bible have secondary meanings. Like, there's the story, and then there's what the story actually means. And I'm not a literalist in that I think, oh, that was Adam and Eve, and I don't believe that Adam and Eve were ever two people. Like, this is a representative story of man and woman, as in humans. But yeah, so would that idea still gel with the Christian ideas of, rather than following Jesus as an individual, but rather as an ideal example of someone to follow in your everyday life?
Well, I'd start with saying in response that if we just look at Jesus as an example, we lose Jesus as Savior. In other words, you can't reduce the witness of the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, the Synoptics, and John's kind of outside that. Paul's epistles, letters to the churches. You can't really reduce that to principles and good advice. That's what's wrong with the church at the moment. They're preaching in some of the places, all you'll hear is self-help talk. That's just how to live a better life and how to get wealthy or how to do these things, in some aspects. And in other areas, they're preaching socialism and trying to make Jesus a Marxist guerrilla, in Judea. I mean, it's reading history backwards. We can't do that. We have to look at the text and understand it for what it is, and to be able to hear their voice first before we bridge that to today in a contextual way. And I think the early church, especially in the Middle Ages with the pagan festivals, I think they did that, contextualized the feasts and the festivals. And I think to some degree, and I think there's some lament that has to come into this, there was sort of a rejection of the Jewish connection there. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. And then it would, see the anti-Semitism that comes in with that. But Easter reminds us, I guess, and that Jesus is a Jewish Messiah. He was a Jew, man, and salvation comes from the Jews. And that as Christians, we are brought in through Jesus Christ into brethren with them, into the brotherhood, into the sisterhood, into the adoption. Where Paul says in Romans 8:15, we are adopted as sons and daughters. Paul's letters a lot of them, there's no historical dispute about them. They are accurate. They are historical. Paul even introduces himself as the author. Luke, for example, addresses the Gospel of Luke and the Acts. Luke wrote Acts as well. Those are more historiography than they are, as you would say, stories. These are recount. This is a recount, and I think it should be taken seriously as a recount, because Luke is writing an investigative story and a response to an event again. So as far as the New Testament goes, I don't think the church made it up. I don't think it was created to try and sell a story. If for example, the New Testament was created to sell an idea or an image of Christ as God, they did a bad job of it. And why that is because there are certain inconsistencies, and they don't hinder the overall message, but it's not perfect. And if they were going to have a message to sell and they were going to propagate that and market it really well, they would get their story straight and everything would fall in line perfectly. And some of it doesn't. It's a little messy in some parts, and that makes it really hard for us to understand. And we go, well, it has to be fake because the witnesses are getting their stories wrong. Well, no, there's an element of historical accuracy that goes with that. One of those accounts would be how Judas died after that. In Acts it says that he died a certain way, and then I think in Matthew it says he died another way, and his guts spilled out, and then another one was that he hung himself or something like that. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but the point is that Judas died. He was struck with grief for what he had done, and he was, I guess, under self-condemnation with that. But as for Adam and Eve, we come back to that in Genesis. I think I believe in a way that is retro-prophetical, so it's prophecy backwards, if you know what I mean. It's a reading of origins, our origins as prophecy in a way. I wouldn't say it was literal 100%, but I would say that it's poetic in that we.
Have you watched Jordan Peterson's presentation on Bible stories?
I've seen them. I haven't actually watched them. I've been too caught up with the other ones he's done.
Yeah. So I'm trying to get through Maps of Meaning at the moment. I watched the first one. He didn't actually get into any of the stories, but I know I've heard his summary of the Genesis story, and I know the way he talks about. There's a story of Cain and Abel, and Babylon's Tower, like the Tower of Babel, and all that kind of thing. And I think I don't know if you call it retroactive prophecy, but it's more the way he explains it is people have been looking at each other very, very closely for a long time. And the way, like the story of Genesis, because if you think about it, the story of Genesis has its origins in the oldest civilizations. So I think it's ancient Mesopotamia, and I think it was there's a small areas just sort of in the southwest of India, where I believe that's where the first ever civilization was. And I think all the stories actually, they're on the Euphrates and in that sort of area in modern day Iraq and Iran. So all these stories originate where people first became civilized. So it makes sense that they were probably most likely describing life before they became civilized and the way that they developed as humans from animalhood into, like, obviously the story is very symbolic of the way they talk of the way that it's described in that way, but it's not meant to be taken as a literal, all right, this is exactly what happened. But the way Jordan Peterson explains it is really, really interesting, especially Adam and Eve, where it's like Adam and Eve, and he talks about, the earth was created from nothing, which is actually correct. I mean, if you understand the Big Bang, then the universe was created from nothing. So in the beginning there was nothing, and then then God said, "Let there be light," and he spoke the word into existence, which is a really interesting. And the way Jordan Peterson sort of ties that in with brings that back to the way we are now, is that human beings, what separates us from the animals is the fact that we can speak. So when we can speak, when we do speak, we are actually speaking the universe into existence. Every time you say something, you're changing what will happen in the future. And it's a really interesting way of highlighting how, like, that part of the Genesis story is actually true if you look at it in a certain way. And he does it with like the stories like Cain and Abel. Like Cain and Abel is the difference between the jealousy and the one who works hard and does well, and the one who doesn't want to work hard and all that kind of thing. So I find it would be interesting to see your thoughts on his take on it. Obviously, you'd have to actually go and watch the videos, and they're quite long. I think it's like 12 hours worth of series.
From what you told me, I mean, I'm impressed with Jordan, and I watched I think it was Joe Rogan. Him sat down with Brett Weinstein, and I watched that whole right through. It was 2.5 hours, I think it was, but it was brilliant. What he had to say was, and even Brett. I mean, and he's an evolutionary biologist. So I mean, I would applaud some of what they said. I think we created from dirt, just as the animals. As far as us being different from the animals in only speech, I think there's a hell of a lot more that we're different from the animals with. We can make decisions. We can exercise reason. We can express love and embrace creativity and art, music. We create instruments to go with that. I mean, it's an exercise of a gift of reason. There are a lot of differences in that sense. So I would probably have to look at it and hear what Jordan had to say with that. But I think that we focus way too much on the similarities that humans have with animals and not enough on the differences. And I think that what separates us from the animal world is the ability to embrace another in forgiveness, for example, without giving into any kind of animal instinct. I think that was the era of Darwinism with Huxley. And I think evolutionary ethics, scientism that flows from that, this atheistic absolutism that says that we derive from the animals so we can basically act like them and justify all sorts of inhumanity to humanity. I mean, it's
I'd like to, so just to stop you there, one of the things that you're sort of touching on, which I wanted to, which is, I'm glad you've gone down this little rabbit hole, is that a lot of the problems I see, a lot of the issues with modern science, and a lot of I think is actually holding modern science back, is this dedication to the material and the idea that we are going to be able to explain everything in the universe in a way that is based on the material sciences and like the materialism and what we can get from it. And in that, when we sort of started embracing this materialistic idea in science, in that everything is based on matter and the entire universe is all matter, we got so many big advancements out of it. So, we got steam engine, we got trains, and then ultimately we got the internet. So materialism has served us very, very well. But I think what's holding a lot of science back is the complete rejection, seemingly, of consciousness as a study. And, we don't understand what consciousness is. And I mean, you talked about what makes us separate from the animals. I mean, yeah, obviously, there's lots of things that make us separate. And I think the biggest thing that makes us separate is, the ability for us to consciously choose our behavior, in the sense that, yes, we can choose to forgive, we can create, we can communicate new ideas to other people. So we have, I actually think the entire universe is consciousness, but we have as human beings, the ability to communicate our ideas and change the way the world is through our own free will, unlike animals can. And so the idea that we're going to get all our scientific breakthroughs just by looking at materialism and what the material sciences can actually get us without actually looking into consciousness. I mean, there are guys who have done, a guy I really like, Rupert Sheldrake, who's done actual scientific studies on things like telepathy and found very, very strong evidence for telepathy. This guy, I mean, this is amazing. It's amazing research. I'm reading his book at the moment, and it really is. It's ground changing. It's like, it's world changing if we just started sort of looking down this path. And like the idea that he has actually the concept of telepathy, like, and it's a situation where, with so much evidence, that it would be hard, you really couldn't actually explain the results of the experiments without without saying, well, yes, that is almost certainly telepathically, like a result of telepathy and things like that. So what I think when it comes to science is we do need to start focusing on research in consciousness, and where if we start researching consciousness and how consciousness works within the universe, it might ultimately bring us back to a point where, wait a minute, I think religion has, I think it actually fits, you can actually fit it in scientifically in terms of like all these stories, like you can actually fit it in and say, this is actually how the world, God, this is how God created the world. And maybe, whether you call it a God or whether you call it creator or just the universe or just the natural being of things. So I think when it comes to science, we should really be focusing on the interesting aspects of consciousness, rather than, like you said, just focusing on the mistakes of the past, in that, all right, humans are obviously, we're just like animals, therefore we must be completely animals. Well, obviously we're not. Obviously there's something different. So what makes us different? Why are we different? And why aren't we studying that difference why aren't we studying that difference a lot more? Because I think that's a really interesting part of science that hasn't been discussed anywhere near enough. And it actually gets, like, that stuff about telepathy obviously gets laughed out of academic circles, the same people who think that socialism is a good idea. But yeah, I think, I really honestly truly believe that we should be focusing a lot more on consciousness studies in science, and it may result in some pretty big breakthroughs in the coming centuries, and will probably change the way that we look at the universe. But yeah, I'm crapping on a little bit. But I was just, David, you actually haven't really said very much. So I was wondering where you were, like if you're actually still there.
I've just been enjoying being a live listener, really. Like, I think you guys have gone far deeper into the nature of God than I would have. It's interesting listening to the conversation. Like, Maddie, you're sort of describing things, I guess, from a Jordan Peterson perspective, and Rod, you're actually coming from a classical Christian perspective. It was one of the things that I tried to cover in the review that I did of the Jordan Peterson talk. I found it very interesting that, like, he didn't actually go out and say, I believe in this, in this, and this. He didn't didn't go through the Christian creed and say, this is what I believe. But he he made a logical case for God. Yeah. Do you consider Jordan Peterson to be a Christian?
I've heard him actually. You look at YouTube, he actually says that he is. But it depends on what you mean by Christian. I mean, I would have.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. Yeah. Like, it's sorry, I know I'm interrupting. It's just that thing where, like, if you consider Jesus just to be like an inspirational figure, and if, as Jordan Peterson sort of describes God, he sort of describes it in terms of life is suffering, but it's also striving for good, and sort of understanding that, like, we have to embrace meaning, but responsibility comes with that meaning, all these sorts of things. But then that makes, like, Jesus' death on the cross, that takes away all the symbolism of it, because, like, plenty of people have been martyrs, but, like, nobody's died for a cause and saved the sins of the world. Like, I'm speaking here as, like, somebody who doesn't believe in Jesus, but I think if you're going to be a Christian, like, you've got to actually recognize, like, that central aspect, like, that's the core of Christianity, like, right there, that when he died, he was God, and doing that saved the sins of the world.
Yes. Well, that's what I say. If we reduce God, Jesus, to just an example, we lose him as savior, and that is an abstract. That's abstracting what is in the gospel and what is the central message of Christianity, which, we didn't create this. We didn't make this up. This isn't something done to manipulate people. This isn't conjuring up God in our own image. Like, you could even argue, I think, that Marx does that, and perhaps even Dawkins to some degree. I think there's a lot of the world. I guess even in church history, there's been evidence of this, where a man has created God in his image rather than taking what God says about himself and going with that. And I think that when we let God speak as he has spoken, we hear a message that we're not comfortable with. We hear that either we're not God, that he is God, and that is, I think, that's uncomfortable to hear because it takes power away from us, and suddenly we find ourselves helpless and not hopeless, definitely not hopeless, because he doesn't abandon his creature. And again, Easter is about this idea that God embraces us in a mighty way. And the third day, the resurrection, is a great victory. It's that victory where he conquers death. And that's the one thing that, the 1900s, 1800s, sorry, where man did everything to conquer mountain, monster, and myth, and even God, which was pronounced by Nietzsche to be dead. And a Dutch artist wrote after that in I guess a criticism of that statement, that when Nietzsche proclaimed that God is dead, I would say that art is dead because of that. So it flows on. This.
I should just point out that when Nietzsche said that God was dead, he wasn't saying it in a positive way. His point was when Nietzsche said that God was dead, he was lamenting the fact, because what he saw was, as a result of God's death, the degradation of society. And it was actually an amazing prediction, because after he proclaimed God's death, we had 2 massive world wars and a century of horrendous atrocities. So I think what people all sort of talk about Friedrich Nietzsche and go, oh, well, he said that God was dead, then he was an atheist. And even the Marxists have sort of used that, used his philosophy to their own ends to push atheism. Oh, well, this guy said that God was dead. But they always forget what he actually meant when he said God is dead. He proclaimed the death of God. He meant it in a very, very bad way, in that he thought that because the idea and living life around these religious customs had basically gone by the wayside, he saw the result would be the degradation of society. And again, he was completely right. So it was an amazing prediction by him. And I believe that God is actually coming back. I think people are really starting to open their eyes that maybe living a life of meaning without meaning is a dead life. And the thing is, I just wanted to bring up a point. You mentioned a couple of times that setting up God as Jesus as just an example would mean you're taking him away as the savior. I disagree with that, because I think that if you look at the life of Jesus and the example he sets, that is a way to salvation, and that is a way to improving you as an individual, society as a whole, a lot for your family, and put you in good stead and help you follow God's light. I actually think that's what that's what the actual message is when you put Jesus up on, in the story of Jesus over Easter. So I don't think that just putting him up as an example is taking him away as salvation, because I think the example that he gives is how to reach salvation. So it's like, I think a little bit of it is semantics, but for me, it's more. I prefer this interpretation because it gives me a guide of how to live my life, rather than someone to look up to and to worship. Which, I don't know. I feel like I'm in the world right now, and if I look at it in the way where God, like Jesus, is the example, and following the example of the way he lived his life is the way to live a meaningful life and ultimately find salvation. I think that's. For me, that's a much more practical. It's a more practical way of going about things. But the thing is, when you say like the way you're saying it, I don't disagree with the way you're saying it. It's not like it's saying, oh no, you're completely wrong. Like, oh no, I don't. I still think Jesus is salvation. It's just that for me, it's like I said, it's the example that he provides. It's like, this is how you should live your life. This is how you live a life of honor, and this is how you do what's best for you. This is how you get in good stead with God, and this is what God wants you to do. This is how God wants you to behave. And if you behave like that, then you're going to make the world a better place, because you're following the example that Jesus set out for you when he died on the cross willingly. So that's just the way I see it.
We're probably on the same wavelength, but I think I'd have to probably clarify maybe what I mean by that is that we don't get to heaven by works. And this is one of the central arguments of the Reformation, justification by faith. This idea it is in Christ alone that we get salvation. Nothing we can do can save ourselves. This is the point of Easter in a lot of ways, that God steps in to do what we cannot do for ourselves. And this is this reach of the creator for the creature, where, you know, he holds us over the abyss. Tolstoy very graphically described a dream he had about being held over the abyss. And it's quite vivid when you read that. I mean, he was an atheist, and he was hanging around with the intelligentsia in Russia and all that stuff. And, you know, if you ever get a chance to check out the book Confessions by Tolstoy, it's a short read. It's not that long, but it's quite descriptive. And he comes to a point where he realizes that, you know, he cannot save himself, and that this point is that works don't get us to heaven. And Islam is about works. If you want to look at religion and in the sense of this idea of earning a place for ourselves. I mean, I think that there is an element of what you're saying with as far as being an example and following his example, the Christ's example. I think to be Christ-like is important. I think to follow Christ is important. But I think ultimately we have to look at that and go, what is the motivation for that Christ-likeness? Is it for my own benefit, or is it at the end in gratitude for what has been done for me already? I guess it's like the prodigal story that Jesus taught, you know, that this idea that the prodigal goes and wastes all of his inheritance and comes home, but the father runs to him with an embrace. He'd already been forgiven. And it's that response we are called to, that response of gratitude in prayer, and in that becomes obedience. And when we live that out, I mean, any broken heart turned towards heaven in a sigh is, you know, turned into a prayer. You know, it's God's embrace of us through grace, and grace is unmerited favor. This notion of no, not even a notion. It's an act. It's a decisive act, just because of who he is. And God cannot be anything other than who he is, and that is love. And this is the problem with that whole love is love argument. It's nonsensical. It's irrational. You know, God is love, and love cannot define itself. And I've already argued that in the posts that I've shared with you guys. But we have a grounding, and the cross grounds us, not just individually, but communally. We are equal in that sense. And anyone who steps up to claim that takes the throne of God away from him and his rightful claim to be Lord of Lords and King of Kings. You know, so
can I butt in with a question? Because one of the things that has been a really big thing on the XYZ has been, I guess, what we would call like a cultural Christian approach. It's something that I've encouraged. Adam Piggott has written a number of articles which we posted on the XYZ, where he's supported going to church, both to support Christianity and to support like one of the key pillars of the West. And one of our new writers, Sam Vimes, has written something basically along those lines, understanding that Christianity is really sort of, it's underpinning like our whole civilization. And if we don't, like, it's the bulwark against Islam coming in, against another religion coming in to our civilization and basically changing it. Back when Adam Piggott wrote his article about, it was called You Don't Go Back to Church Because You Believe in God. It came out of a conversation that we'd had with a few other people, and then I sort of had a response to it. And my question was, does God need cultural Christians? And I guess it sort of ties in with what you're saying here. It's like, well, you know, like if God is God, if God exists and he's all powerful, then like, does it really matter what we do?
Well, he invites,
or is this God working through us? You know what I mean?
He invites participation. The whole point of Jesus, you know, coming is this: he's Emmanuel, God with us. Right throughout the Old Testament, you hear the prophecy. You know, not even just a statement. It's called the covenant formula. I will be your God, and you will be my people. This is an invitation to relationship. This is an invitation to be free for God and free for others, as Karl Barth would say. You know, it's a. I would say no. God doesn't need cultural Christianity. I think that there are a lot of issues with cultural Christianity, particularly if you look into evangelicalism in America, American evangelicalism. There's issues there where there are almost, it pains me to say it, but there are towers of Babel that have been created, that man has taken that position of God, and there are little popes walking around in that sense. And the church then relies on the personality of the pastor and not Jesus Christ. I think the only savior of the West and the East is Jesus Christ, and I think there's a unifying weight to that. I think there's a truth in that, because it's essentially about relationship, and it's unfortunately distorted by the left in politics, where they've made Jesus to be some social justice warrior, where that's an abstraction who he was and he is, and who he will be. The claim that's made that he will be Lord, he will return again. So, to answer your question, Christianity must, if it's to be Christian, stand outside culture in a way of critique, in a way of saying this is the way to go in it. So in a sense, yes, and in a sense, no. I think we've got to be careful because of Christianity. I think theology in particular has to be free to be a criticism of ideology or ideology. I think it needs to be free to do that. One of the blurrings, when it blurs, you end up with what you had in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, is the German Christian heresy. You end up with people selling indulgences to set people free from purgatory.
I think a lot of the issue that I see there coming out is a wedding of the church and the state. So the state, it's not the church that's the problem there either. It's the state that's the problem. People always forget that the common denominator in the issue of getting rid of the link between church and state is getting rid of the state, because whenever the state comes into science or education or anything like that, you got to get it out. So I just wanted to stop you there because we had a couple of questions. One person asked you, so letting God speak, what does that mean in a practical sense?
Well, letting God speak is reading the Bible as it is, letting it speak as it is. I mean, it is a witness. It's God's witness to us through many people of different authors, genders, the two, male and female. I have to qualify that, unfortunately, these days. But the fact is that
I think we're getting an incoming message from Azio.
Did he say there was only two genders?
Yeah, you'll be banned from Facebook in a matter of days.
Yeah, we'll be banned from Facebook. Luckily, we're not streaming on that. It's a zombie website now. It is a zombie website. Minds is killing it. Everyone should get over to Minds as quickly as possible.
Yeah, what is it?
XYZ is on Minds.
Someone left it. I can't remember the guy's name.
So Elon Musk has left. Playboy's left. I deleted my Facebook completely. I deleted it. I made a photo album, like a family photo album, and Facebook pictures.
I love the juxtaposition of Elon Musk, Playboy, and Matty's Modern Life. That's magnificent.
Yes, we are the holy trinity of the internet.
Sorry, Rod, we derailed that a little bit. What were you?
That's fine, man.
What were you saying?
Yeah. I think cultural Christianity, to come back to that point, is it almost is nominalism. It's kind of Christianity, Christian in name only. And you can go to church on Sunday and go through all the motions and follow the ritual and come out feeling pretty good and that. But the next day, if there's been no transformation of the heart through an active dynamic relationship that you're engaged in, through discipleship, for example, there's going to be no change. There won't be any transformation. There won't be any change.
I agree with what you're saying. Would I be able to rephrase the question in that case, because it's making me sort of formulate my ideas as well here. Does the church in the West need cultural Christians? Because I think of myself and Adam and Sam Vimes, and I think if we were to go back to church and we were to sort of we would reinforce the idea that if you're going to be Christian, you've got to be Christian. Like, you can't have this fluff. You can't have this, it's not about all the social justice stuff. And we would you know, we would provide like numbers for like strong pastors, for strong priests, to say, no, look, this is what Christianity is about. This is what the Bible says. We've got to go with what the Bible says. Do you think that would be a benefit?
I think it depends on what you mean by cultural Christian as well.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be like me saying that I'm a conservative theologian, which I wouldn't overdo because I'm a Christian theologian. So if I was to say that I was a conservative theologian, I would be almost negating the whole point of my, theory. I mean, I have to be a critique. I have to be in critique of conservatism as I am of liberalism and modern liberalism. I've got to find a balance between that, and that can be hard to do, especially in the world today. But does the church need you guys? Of course, you're welcome. Does it need cultural Christians? Again, it depends on the definition and what you mean by that. I think if we get rid of the word cultural, I think if we just stick with the word Christian and drop the prefix, I think that we find that there's a simplicity to that, and I think from that we work out a godly sincerity, as Paul calls it in Corinthians. Then there's no competition. There's no distinction between who is who. You're a Christian, and that's the whole point again of Easter, is that this distinction is it doesn't exist. You are Greek or Jew. You're in Christ. It's this bringing together of God's family, God's children to Him, in the sense that He reaches out for us.
No worry. All right. So we had another question from the audience as well, from Individual Unknown. That's their actual name. So they're unknown. We have no idea who they are. Do you think the debate between Christians and atheists has shifted to Westerners and Marxists in the last decades? And why is that so? So I think maybe get Dave to. I could answer this question as well, but I reckon maybe Dave, do you want to chime in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Marxism, like, it recognized, like I bang on about it a lot. I talk about classical Marxism being cultural Marxism, and cultural Marxism is classical Marxism 101. Like, the Marxists understood that, like, there were pillars of the West, like the family, the nation, and the church, and they deliberately went after it. Like, Marx described religion as the opium of the masses, and they realized that it had to be brought down to basically bring down the whole system so that they could achieve Marxism. So it's like you've got this ungodly degeneracy versus just like the tradition and the culture and the morality of like what we once had. It's like a battle of good versus evil that we're pitted in at the moment.
Well, it ultimately is a battle of good versus evil in the most fundamental sense. So, I mean, it's an interesting question, and I do think that yes, I think the debate between Christians and atheists has pretty much shifted to the West versus people who are inherently Marxist, and with the Marxists pushing this militant atheism, which is anti-intellectual in and of itself. I mean, they put themselves up as being these intellectual behemoths, but their entire ideology is based on absolutes, oppressor versus oppressed. There is no God. You stole your wealth off someone else. All these ridiculous absolutes that actually make no sense when you put them up against even a little bit of scrutiny and a little bit, all right, let's test these ideas based on the evidence and reason, even without the example of the 20th century, and they don't stand up to scrutiny. So it's interesting that, I think a lot of what when I said before that I think Christianity is on its way back, I think a lot of that is to do with the left really pushing a lot against society. I mean, I think that they, on one hand, are getting brave enough to start, really trying expanding their reigns of power And on the other hand, I think they're sort of realizing that maybe the jig might soon be up, in that people have started to realize who is the actual enemy. And it's these atheistic, ungodly demon spawn known as the collective left, aka Marxists, and people who are like the Westerners. Even Dave, you sort of called them cultural Christians. I mean, you could, for me,
we're trying to find a definition of it.
Well, for me, a cultural Christian, the difference between someone who was a cultural Christian and someone who was a Christian would be a cultural Christian is more agnostic in their belief of like whether or not there is a God, whereas someone who is Christian, who may not necessarily go to church, says yes, there is a God, and yes, I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus was a savior. Or even if they don't, like, even yes, I believe in God and I believe in the values that Christianity teaches us. So that would still be a Christian. But then you'd have someone who probably like me up until a couple of years ago, from my teen years, I maybe would have been called, you could define me as a cultural Christian, in that I was agnostic to the spirituality side of it. I mean, because I didn't know, I had no idea whether, in my mind, I still sort of have no idea as well. It's just experiences that made me lean towards, yes, I think there probably is a creator. So for me, before that, I would say I was probably a cultural Christian, in that I was agnostic in my belief, but my behavior was still Christian. Like the way that I behaved and the way that I went about my life was still Christian. So I still always tried to tell the truth, and I still live by Christian values. Yeah.
It's the understanding that like everything that we do, like I guess like we're kind of the first or second generation to that's being like sort of separated from like a really godly society, or like a church going society, but everything that we have is still like, it's still the legacy of Christianity. So that legacy, like it's still with us. And so that's the when people ask, can right and wrong exist without God, and they argue, well, you can still behave morally like without having a God. We can't get away from the fact that we still like the world that we live in is still the legacy of Christianity. And so our morality, even if we try to separate that from God, is still separated from like our basis in Christianity. You know what I mean?
See, it's funny. I'll let you answer that one in a second, but I just want to point out this idea that like, can you live morally without, like, is there morality without God? It's like, see, the way I probably won't have time to explain it all today, but the way I see it, there can be a God and no God at the same time, and it would be irrelevant. Because if you think about it, if consciousness is at the heart of the universe and there was a conscious creator of our universe, then that would be the natural state of reality. Therefore, God would be both a God and not a God at the same time, because God would just be the nature of being a conscious being that has created our universe. And that would ultimately be, from our perspective, it would be a God. But if you look at it from the nature of reality, it would just be the nature of reality. So when someone says, oh, can you have morality without God? I say, well, yeah, of course you can. You can have a God without God. It's like you can have a morality, like morality. There's universal morality, whether you like it or not. And it's been proven that there's universal morality. So yes, you can have morality without God. But the thing is, it's like, it makes it a lot easier if you have that guiding light, and you just say, all right, well, and there are some people who do need to be told, if you don't do the right thing, you're going to go to hell. There are some, and it is easier for them, but no, I don't think you don't need to have some sort of overarching principle saying you have to do this and you have to do that, because I actually think it's built into the universe naturally. It's like, it's a natural part of the universe to act morally, and if you have a look at it, if you act truly morally, then you are more likely to get better things out of life. That means acting in a moral, being truly meek. It's like the meek shall inherit the earth in the traditional sense, in that it's humility with the ability to fight back if you need to. Like, meek is sort of changed into this term to mean weakness, but it actually means strength and humility. So like, when I say the meek shall inherit the earth, it's the people who will act morally and also will stand up for themselves as they need to. But theoretically, to summarize back to the start, no, I don't think that we need a God to guide that morality. I think that morality is built into the universe which means God's already said it anyway, if you believe that.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
if I could respond to that, I think if we become the source of good and evil ourselves and the determiners of good and evil, then we put ourselves in God's position. And that's a very toxic place for us to be, because it's a huge responsibility. And when I mean about hearing God speak and listening to what God has to say and letting him speak as he's revealed himself, and I would say through witnesses and through, ultimately Jesus Christ, come back to Easter again, we end up with inhumanity, because we end up with this issue of subjectivism that comes from that there is an objective moral law that comes to us. Say with the Ten Commandments, if we look at that, the Ten Commandments, it's a word spoken to humanity, given to the Hebrews, right? It's spoken from outside of ourselves. It comes from outside ourselves. I don't know if I'd say it's inherent within us. I think there's a predisposition to God that would be within us. I would probably agree with that statement, because we were with God in the beginning, but we fell into sin through doing exactly what I was just saying. We took this position of God to say that we can determine what is right, what is wrong, what is good and evil, what is evil. And if we put ourselves in that position, or society or even the state does, what you end up with is what we saw in the 1930s and 1940s in Germany. And what you see right throughout the 20th century with Pol Pot, with the Soviet Union, there's all this sort of justification for inhumanity to others, and even oppression in the name of the oppressed. It's something that I think we can't justify, and I think as I said, it's from my perspective anyway. It's in the Ten Commandments we have this, the two sides. It's all relational. We have God, and then on the other side we have our neighbor, right? How we were to respond to our neighbor, and in that sense. So we have a pretty straightforward word spoken to us from outside ourselves. It's something that we can either reject or listen to, or manipulate and try and, in order to advance our own ideas or our own power, our own kingdoms. And that's where that cultural Christian thing, I think I would have issues with that, because it's either Christian or it's not. And in the sense that it's either giving God full glory and living out life in that fullness and the abundance of that relationship that we're given, that gift of grace. Again, as I mentioned Karl Barth, he said the grace lived is either lived or it's not grace. And so we either embrace that or we reject it. And that includes, I guess, the example of Christ and following that example, as you mentioned, Maddie. I think from what I read in theology books and in political spheres and throughout the Bible, I think that there is this transcendent word that comes to us and becomes imminent in our life and in the world of humanity. And I think we either wisely follow it or we don't. I mean, as I have a sort of favorite sort of saying that if God has spoken in time and space and revealed himself and made himself known, then reason would state that we should follow that or listen carefully to it. Especially when it comes to these moral laws or this morality.
Yeah. So, okay. So what? Someone's just sort of asked the question, which I thought I'd jump in there to answer it, because it does tie in. Is that can you have an objective morality without God? And I answered yes in the stream, but I just wanted to clarify that. So you can have an objective morality in that people have been trying to discover, secular scientific proof of morality for a long time, and Stefan Molyneux has actually already proved it. It hasn't gone mainstream yet through something called universally preferable behavior, which basically proves objective morality by putting a universally preferable behavior test. It's get my head around it But basically it means that morality, unless something can be universally preferable, it's most likely immoral. So, it can't be universally preferable to rape, to commit murder, to steal, and to assault. And these are the 4 things that you need to, if you want a true moral system, you have to make sure these things are ruled out. So universally preferable behavior, you should read the book, go and have a look about it. It's a really interesting argument, and it does actually prove objective morality. And what it says to me is that this objective morality is built into the fabric of the universe. I think it's actually built into our universe for us to discover. So when I hear people say, "Oh, we got to live by God's law," and you mentioned correctly in that people shouldn't be trying to make God's laws or make even natural laws, even if you don't call it a God, even if you just call it natural law. Like, there are still natural laws within the universe and within nature that, if you go against these natural laws, then you're going to create disaster, and you're going to create a lot of suffering, which is what these left-wing ideologies, socialism, communism, fascism, what they all do is they try to go against the natural law, and they create all that suffering. And you could argue from a theological point of view is that, yes, they've gone against the laws as set out by God, and this is what happens. But I would say also that, if the universe was created by a creator or as a function of reality, then you don't need a God you don't need there to be a God watching you all the time for there to be an objective morality, because it's built into the universe. And it's that deist point of view where the universe was basically wound up and sent on its way, and like God sort of has his guiding hand in there, and he tries to get you to do the right thing, and he shows himself. But overall, it's up to you to discover, or it's up to people to discover the laws that are set out in the universe in order to govern our own morality. So I think where Christianity and where religion comes in, which is really good, is that it helped people put them on the right path. But I think now that we've really actually discovered how to behave correctly and behave in a moral way that is objectively moral, maybe Christianity religion should maybe, it's going to be able to focus more on that spiritual aspect as well, and the community and all that kind of thing. So it's not necessary. I think it's not necessary for there to be a God, but it does actually help quite a lot, in that if there's a God looking over us and who wants us to discover the laws, and he's guiding us a little bit and watching over us and all that kind of thing, then I think it does help, but it's not necessary in a fundamental level, for a fundamental reason of what I explained.
Well, I would say I would have to ask, have we really reached that point where we understand objective morality? I mean, there are abortion factories, man, everywhere in the West.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, when I say we, I mean the human race is in a couple of individuals. Like Stefan Molyneux's written a book that not that many people have heard about, called Universally Preferable Behavior. That means we as humans have discovered, as a species, have discovered objective morality. It's just that, as you said, there are still abortion factories, and there are still people committing horrendous acts of immorality around the world. It's like one or two people discovering something doesn't mean that the entire world is going to adopt it right away. There's a lot of resistance, obviously, and when it's found that stealing is objectively immoral and always results in bad outcomes, how the hell is the government going to get its money? It's got to steal its money, otherwise, they're in a little bit of trouble. So there's going to be a lot of resistance to the idea of objective morality. And I think in a lot of ways it actually suits the powers that be, that it's sort of tossed to the side in religion. But this is where religion can come in. Religion can give people that guiding lights, which is what I like about Christianity, is that I look at Christianity and I look at the laws of universally preferable behavior, and I think Christianity actually fits it. The way that it teaches people to act, it actually fits it. Teaches people to be a good person, love the neighbor as you would love yourself, which is what UPB says. Ultimately, at its heart, I think this is always going to be the golden rule: to love yourself, to love others as you would love yourself. That's my thoughts on it.
The source of that was Yahweh, in the Old Testament. That is credited to God. That's not credited to man. Finding his way, man is lost in his way, and that's something the Bible teaches us, that throughout. And when I say Bible, I mean all of the books, and throughout even the New Testament, you see that same thing, that we have all fallen short of the glory of God, and even fallen short of each other. We've let each other down, and you know, I think 20th century really exemplifies that. And I would say it sounds a lot like Immanuel Kant's principle that if you're not going to be a liar, then don't lie. So if a guy comes to your door and wants to kill someone, you've got someone inside, and they want to kill that person inside. Do you lie, and does that make you a liar? You'd have to let him in if you're going to follow that objective morality that we've created.
Well, that's the thing. It's like if you're protecting someone. See, there's a difference between committing fraud and lying in order to protect someone from the force of others, because it's like the person coming into the house there wants to commit an act of immorality against the people in the home. Therefore, you might need to lie to protect those people. Therefore, what you're doing isn't actually immoral. Again, I've read Universally Preferable Behavior and The Art of the Argument by Stephen Molyneux. So like, this is where I'm channeling these two books in order to make the point about objective morality and about a universally objective morality known as universally preferable behavior, which I think is actually a law built into the universe in order to guide people into how to act. And we're meant to discover it. And what it'll tell us is that, again, like you're talking about, like it's God's law in that you should treat others as you treat yourself, or you should love others as you love yourself. I think ultimately we're going to find out that this is my speculation, that we're going to find out that is the most true argument. At the end of the day, I'll probably make a video about it eventually when I've got the balls. I've written it up. But it's an interesting discussion to have. I'll just check whether or not. Is there anything else you wanted to add there, Rod or Dave? You've been a bit quiet for the last sort of 10 minutes.
The thing about Christianity is that it inspires people. Universally preferable behavior. All these sort of almost like a libertarian approach to like morality and all that sort of stuff. It's great, and it requires a certain level of IQ and sort of curiosity to sort of find it. In Christianity, you already have like a structure which can set those rules across the whole of society. And so, like, if we are going to, like, if we were to have universally preferable behavior sort of become like society-wide, like it would take a while to catch on.
And a big reason it will take a while to catch on is it's actually quite complicated and hard to understand. That's a big, and it's hard to explain to people, because it's like, what do you mean universally preferable behavior? It's like, that's behavior that would be preferred by most, or is preferable for you and everyone else in that situation.
And it's where I would say, it's what I would say, like, when I think of cultural Christians, I think of people who like myself, don't believe in God, but are open to the idea that God might exist, but understand that Christianity, if it's done well, it can provide the structure to like transmit those ideas to society, and therefore it has to be supported. And like, so we already have a system to support universally preferable behavior, and it's called Christianity.
I know I kind of have a problem with that. I think it sounds a lot like political correctness, just with a different name.
Oh, yeah, right.
David, mate, what are you doing to yourself?
I've got nothing on that.
That's a shot across the
think about that. Well, it's why I ask these questions. It's
throw a meme at him, Dave.
The idea of it, yeah. It's why I'm uncomfortable about the idea of it as well. It's an ongoing. It's an ongoing process. How do you? Why do you say it sounds like political correctness? I find that really, really interesting.
Well, it's a behavior that's been predetermined as moral by somebody other than God. It still has man or woman at the center of that. the determination of good and evil, right and wrong. And if we surrender to that, we surrender to tyranny and oppression. And unless we have this transcendent morality, you could say transcendent morality, I guess, that becomes imminent through a voice spoken in time and space, through the self-revelation of God, and we listen to that word and we hear it and we follow that, we're only going to have our own word to go by. Now, I guess, the argument is, well, how do you know that the Israelites didn't make that up, or the Hebrews? Well, faith, and if that universal preferable behavior is legit, then it didn't begin with the guy who wrote a book. It begins and ends with Jesus Christ. It begins and ends with God, with Yahweh, who speaks that word to humanity in time and space. And that way, I have no claim to that. You have no claim to that. The Marxists have no claim to that. The socialists, the conservatives have no claim to that. It's God's, and we respond to that in gratitude and prayer, in living our lives in thankfulness for what He has done and how He has made Himself known in that sense. And through living out that in discipleship, in relationship with God and relationship with others, we are free. We're set free and set free to do that. And again, and coming back to the Easter, what makes Easter so profound is this concept of relationship. The God who is free sets humanity free, and it's not done by humanity, so no one can take credit for it. God does it Himself. It's not within us to do that. We are limited. But science has achieved some great things. We've made advances where others haven't. It's brilliant. Other generations, and it's great, and it should be celebrated. But we can't be ignorant of the wisdom of the past. And that's where conservatism, that's where the conservatives have a right voice. I think it's so easy to tear something down, and so hard to replace it or build it back up again. That's something.
The thing. And look, you make some really good points there, obviously. And as you mentioned, I mean, if universally preferable behavior is correct and legit, it is actually something that would be built into the universe. Therefore, it still follows the path that you would like, that you're sort of advocating there, in that it's a universal law spoken to us by God. It's built into the fabric of the universe and into the fabric of our reality. That therefore it's universal and it's eternal. So it does fit that. It does fit that definition. Now, I just want someone sort of a little bit confused about what UPB is. So, I mean, we've been going for quite a while, so we should probably finish up. I'll just explain. I'll try and do my very, very best, really quick definition of how it works, and direct you to the actual book. You can actually go and find the book; it's totally free. But universally preferable behavior, it's behavior that is preferable universally for everyone. So it's behavior that is preferable, not preferred, but preferable. So it would be preferable for you to brush your teeth every evening. Doesn't mean that necessarily is preferred, but it would be preferable, because if you don't, you're more likely to have your teeth fall out. Now, where they test it is if, like, just one example, let's say you have, in order to test it against certain behaviors, you say, what would happen in a situation where these two behaviors are universally preferable? So you flip the book and say, what if these behaviors are universally preferable? Is it possible for them to be universally preferable? And you can do that with things like, we'll do theft, because theft's an easy one. So if you have two people in a room, you have John and you have Paul. If for theft to be universally preferable, that means these people want to be stealing all the time. But if they want to be stealing, then that means, like, if this person steals from that person, then all of a sudden he's not stealing, therefore he's not being moral, therefore he has to give it back, and then this person has to steal. So it's impossible for theft to be universally preferable, because if theft is a moral behavior, theft cannot possibly be moral, because it cannot possibly be preferable for more than one person at any given time. That's a really brief explanation of how it works. But I would suggest that everyone to go and actually read the book and look into it, because it does give a secular proof of ethics and morality and it would have been built into the universe. Therefore, there are obviously people in the audience who are agnostic, but if you're agnostic or not, if it's built into the universe, it doesn't make a difference whether God created it or not, because it's built into the universe. So for all intents and purposes, there is no practical difference. But anyway, I mean, it was a really good chat. Rod, did you want to finish up with any last words before? Any last words? Ominous. Any sort of final comments before Dave? You can go now, Dave. Your service. You can go last. All right. Yeah. So any sort of maybe just a few final statements before we close off the stream. Rod, you there, mate?
Yep.
No. You're all right. So you've said your piece.
Yeah. Just thanks for having me.
No worries. Happy Easter. Thank you very much, Dave. Did you want to finish up?
This is a bit facetious. It is finished.
It is finished. The live stream is over. The live stream is dead, to be reborn next Monday. Tune in 9 o'clock to 9:30. I think we'll probably move it back to 9:30 again next week. Yeah. We'll do it again 9:30 next week. Thanks everyone for watching. If you watched all the way to the end, you're great. Don't forget to click the bell, like, comment, subscribe, and check out XYZ, the greatest newspaper in Australia right now. And I don't think anyone disagrees. Therefore, I'll see you around, everyone. See you when I see you.